areas and etc. And even the newspapers are published from the they would call it a central bus station. So he went to the central bus station one night and saw that there was an Israeli flag, a Filipino flag, and the gay rainbow flag hanging outside where he would find the paper dolls performing for the Filipino community. Hemon follows 5 of the dolls: Salvatores, Sally, Komatoy, Chiki, Jokno, Giorgio, that I found out everyone in the Filipino community called him Jojo, Jojo Jokno, Trowan Jacob or Jan Libas, and Francisco or Cheska P. Ortiz Jr. Through their stories of caring for elderly men, romance, bombings, immigrant police raids, detention, and deportation. Using this documentary, I want to briefly and tentatively sketch out 3 ideas in this afternoon's talk. First, the formation of heterotopias. These are national counter sites, sites that you don't see in the everyday of a particular nation, but of course they're necessary to maintain the nation itself in its nation building projects. The notion of palabas, as expounded by Patrick Flores from UP, and also just the double meaning in Tagalog of palabas, both as a show, something spectacular, a spectacle, and also palabas, emotional output. And of course, the third is affect and affection as a commodity, to question the facile metaphorical elisions among the terms family, gender, labor, belonging, and the nation. That is to say, caregiving. You're paying for care. Like, you care for you. What does that mean when you're actually paying somebody to care for you, care about you, give you emotional support, etc., etc., and that is an economic relationship. Yeah, all right, and that it's part of a national and two binational policies. The Philippines actually encourages the output labor export there, and of course Israel, Italy, among others, of course, would consume them on the other side. Now, the fact that 3 flags fly over the paper doll's performance space is noteworthy. Each flag presumably represents the cultural belonging of these caregivers, also performers, to these national and quasi-national spaces: Israel, the Philippines, and we'll tentatively call it the queer trans nation. Yet the flag also marks the claims, the flags themselves also mark the claims of these cultural sites over the labor of these performers as part of their nation-building efforts. So it's not just cultural belonging, but these sites, the nation or the trans-nation or the pseudo-nation, actually demands their labor at the same time, right? So I'm trying to entangle myself in the microphones. In the Philippine case, as we all know, 8 million or 10% of Filipinos work overseas to shore up the well-being of countless families here and that of the national economy. By the end of 2006, those are my latest statistics. I'll have to look up my latest statistics 2 years later. Filipinos and Filipinas working overseas remitted nearly $13 billion back to the Philippines. In fact, between 1990 and 2001, remittance earnings comprise an average of 20% of the country's export earnings. Those of you might have read in your classes Manalansan, Pareñas, Choi, and also Robin Rodriguez, among others, maybe Zanton Blanc and Glick Schiller. Lots of those folks you might have heard in your classes. They've all explored the centrality of remittances and the export labor economy in the Caribbean and in the Philippines, and for the health and continuity of the Philippine economy. And this, therefore, is a nation-building effort through labor that happens elsewhere. Okay, outside of the national borders. Now, in Israel, on the other hand, after the second intifada, that is to say the uprising of Palestinians against the occupation of their land by the Israeli state, Israel expelled and closed its borders to Palestinians who were no longer welcome as service labor. Literally, it was against the law to have a Palestinian work in your home, so they would no longer actually be allowed, even though they might be citizens, right? They're Israeli citizens, but they're not allowed to migrate into Jewish areas, right? Foreign workers were brought in to do jobs Israelis could not or did not want to perform, including giving care to the elderly, the niche for Filipinos starting around the 1980s. At present, 180,000 foreign workers reside in Israel, a country of only 7.2 million. 75% of that is Jewish, 20% are Arab, Christian and Muslim Arab, and 4% other. These workers are made up of Filipino, Thai, Chinese, Indian, Nigerian, Sudanese, Romanians, and Turks, among others. These have been arriving since the first Intifada in 1988. Around 100,000 of these 180,000 are illegal, that is to say, undocumented or became illegal at a certain point, with another 80,000 who are legally documented. Around 50,000 that live around the central bus station that I mentioned before, the Takan m4v, in Tel Aviv. Of the 180,000 foreign workers now in Israel, approximately 40,000 are Filipinos. That's a fungible number, because with undocumented and when you're illegal, it's hard to count, because people don't want to be counted. So there's only an estimate. So it could be 40, and of course, depending on the rhetoric in the Knesset or the Israel's parliament, it could go as the threat. If you're going to make a rhetoric that it's threatening, then you'll say that they're about like 80,000. And of course, if you're going to make a rhetoric that they're actually not a threat, then you would go lower. So we don't know what the numbers are, but about 40,000 Filipinos are in Israel. Now, these Filipinos fill the service labor gap among Israelis and are dependent primarily on private family employment as caregivers, house cleaners, and kitchen help. Now, the community is quite organized. The community has 3 newspapers, including Focal and Manila Tel Aviv. Those are the 2 main newspapers. Weekly newspapers published out of an office in the central bus station. I saw the offices. They're tiny little offices. They're multifunction. Some of them actually are used to teach folks computer literacy, for example. Sometimes they run language classes, Hebrew, for them. You need Hebrew, obviously, just for the everyday. So they're purpose offices as well as primarily offices. And it's a very organized community that work with the Philippine embassy over there. They even have a text brigade. Everyone knows if there's a bombing in Haifa or a bombing elsewhere near East Jerusalem, then immediately everyone can text. They have a tree, a text tree, where everyone immediately knows if anyone was hurt, all right, and if they need transportation to it. It's fantastic, really organized, tight grouping. In the last 5 years, the 3 Israeli films, documentary and fictional, namely, one is called Will They Take Away the Children Too? The second one is Alila, and the third one I mentioned already, Meduzot. And at least one Israeli music video, Dana Belbel's Sleep Without Dreaming, have featured Filipino caregivers and labor issues. These migrants are ineligible for citizenship and are also immediately deportable upon loss of their employment or death of the employer. Their presence in the Israeli nation-state stands tenuously on fragile economic and affective relations in Israeli homes. Right? So that's one of the issues, I think, the human rights issues that left labor organization, it's called Kabla Ovet, which is, of course, a workers' rights organization with it's multinational, but it is predominantly Israeli left who run that for workers' rights. That they have to separate the legal status of the Filipino from the employer. So you cannot be dependent on your employer's death or not. There must be a way by which you, as an individual, can actually offer your labor, since it is yours and not the employer's, to actually go elsewhere if need be. But that is not the case. That's one of the human rights sort of like discourse that they circulate as far as what this violates. I want to talk about these nation-building projects, both in Israel and in the Philippines, that the paper dolls participate in occurs outside, as I said before, the quotidian and the public sphere. Filipino workers care for their families and the Philippine national well-being through these remittances, as I mentioned. Caregivers tend to the beginning, however, and end of the citizens' lives in capital-rich countries of Asia and Europe, Hong Kong, Singapore, Italy, Israel. In Israel, they provide end-of-life care for the sick, handicapped, and elderly in place of unwanted, differently marked, and differently raced Palestinian laborers. Though absent physically in one nation and absent politically in the other, this labor is vital to the continuity of both nation-states. I find Foucault's notion of heterotopia helpful here in thinking about the role of these caregivers in terms of globalized labor. Now, what is a heterotopia? To quote, "Because these places are absolutely different from all the sites that they reflect and speak about, I shall call them by way of contrast to utopias, heterotopias. So Foucault was defining utopia as the relation